to all of the recent changes that have happened with ACA, coming out of the month, but it's my great pleasure to introduce to you from PACFA, both Nigel Pollack and Joanna DeWeaver. We're very grateful that you have all come, along with Nee Robinson, who's the head of education at PACFA, and we're looking forward to what you have to share with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret. I thought we were, it's nice and echoey. I thought we were going to get some more of Nathan. Oh, I really would want straight up, but here we are. So lovely to be here. Lovely to meet you all, and I hope that I do get to meet you all before the end of the day. We're here to talk about the future of counselling in Australia. My job is to present the vision. And it is visionary. It's not intended to be something that you can hold us accountable for. It's simply intended. My brief was come up with a vision for the future of the profession. I'm like, right, Nathan's had a crack. I'm going to have a crack too. And it'll be like Nathan's, and it won't be like Nathan's at the same time. What we need to be clear on is that our goal is to focus on the profession and the needs of the sector. And we won't be able to offer the same level of education and training to provide a relevant detail as all of you can. So just don't have that expectation. This is our overview. Go through acknowledgement, vision, registration, employment, training, opportunities and challenges. So my name is Nigel Pollack. I am the president and chairperson of the board of directors at PACFA. I thought, I did put on the slide, I kind of had this, oh, everybody will know who I am, but I realized, no, you won't know who I am. You don't know. You don't know me. So I'll tell you who I am. And I'll tell you who I am because I've only been around for a year, but I hope to be around for at least another 5 at PACFA. We have 2-year terms in the presidency, which is also the chairperson of the board, and we have a maximum of 3-year terms. So we have, a maximum of 3 2-year terms. I'm there for a maximum of 6 years under our current constitution, a constitution which is currently under review. I have a Bachelor of Science, so I studied psychology first. I studied psychology at the same time as I did my law degree. It was a smoother pathway for me to do a graduate diploma of legal practice and then practice as a solicitor, and I'm still admitted on the roll of the solicitors of the Supreme Court of New South Wales. That career wasn't the best fit for me. My description of that career is that you take a round person and you cut off the edges and you make them fit into the square peg holes of the legal system. That was not comfortable for me. I was good at it, but not comfortable with it. So I jumped ship, which was really hard. And I did a certificate, a graduate certificate in Gestalt therapy, which I found inspiring. But mostly within the Gestalt therapy, I was interested in phenomenology and existential therapy. I discovered that I had a real passion for existential philosophy, which is not something that I discovered in any of my undergraduate training in all my years of studying psychology. It was only something that I found as I looked into the therapeutic world. That led me to the UK, where I did my Masters of Psychotherapy and Counselling at Regent's College, because I was star chasing Professor Ernesto Spinelli, who was talking my language. And so I was lucky enough to do many units in my master's degree with Ernesto, and also to have him as the supervisor on the master's thesis, which, just for interest's sake, was looking at psychotherapists' experience of boundaries. So I developed a really deep insight into boundaries, and like a lot of people who do a lot of things, I did it because I was told on placement that I didn't have a good understanding of boundaries. So I'm like, all right, I better go and figure this out. And I still think that my placement supervisor was wrong in her very, very tightly psychoanalytic definition of what boundaries are. And I'm like, well, I've got the master's thesis and I can understand what did I do next? I didn't stop studying for a long, long time. So I did Gestalt therapy. Then I did a graduate certificate in conflict resolution. And then I got a graduate certificate in family dispute resolution. I've got a master's of business administration. I've done a Cert 4 in training and assessment. I've also got a Cert 2 in small scale sawmilling, which is a whole other story around Black Saturday bushfires and being out of work and deciding that I'd build a house, which was dumb because I'd never built anything else before, never even made anything since year 8 in woodworking. But with the help of YouTube and my community, I managed to build a really, really lovely house. Also thanks to my partner, who's got a great eye and doesn't care about reality, and just says, I want this, 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 and this. And I just went, I'm going to make it happy. How do I do that? And then so it turns out we built the house that she envisioned, and I built it, which was lovely. So I've got practical hands-on skills as well. The other counselling moral to that story that I tell is that I was assessed by a clinical psychologist as being suitable to go back to work after the trauma of the bushfires, which me and my family were in at the time. And I went back to work and I went, no, I'm not suitable to do this. I need to not be here where I might do damage to people in my current state. I need to find something else to do, what's meaningful, what's purposeful, go back to my community and build my house and help other people build their homes, and then do some projects. The sawmilling came out of a project where we recovered, I'll tell a little bit, we recovered the timbers that have been like old growth forest timbers that have been cut down because they were deemed unsafe. They were put into a paddock, nobody knew what to do with them. I led a community project where we got a training provider in sawmilling. We got some free donated Lucas mills, and we invited anybody in the community to come along and do various range of certifications while we sawed through all this wood and provided all this timber for the community. And then I got to build my house out of the timber that I built myself, which was such a really, really wonderful feeling and experience for me. So what else have I done? So I was a lawyer. I was a family lawyer, a criminal lawyer, lots of child protection work, lots of employment work, general practice. And I was in the country. I was in the Wild West. Anybody who knows Canamble, Walgett, Lightning Ridge, Dubbo, that was where I learned how to be a lawyer. On my transition to becoming a therapist, I went through youth work. I worked in juvenile justice. Living in the UK, I worked in youth offending teams. I became a restorative justice convener. I was a founding member of the Victorian Association for Restorative Justice. I practiced family group conferencing with families affected by the child protection system. I worked in, I became a family dispute resolution practitioner, family relationship advisor. Then, post Black Saturday, really, I started to work independently as a counsellor in private practice. I identify as an existential therapist, even though I am not, not within PACFA, able to be accredited as a psychotherapist. I very much believe that I practice psychotherapy, and so really differentiate between what we call a psychotherapist and someone who does psychotherapy. I was also an educator. I've been working at the Australian College of Applied Psychology now professions for about 11 years, and now I continue to do clinical supervision for them. My practice nowadays is post-COVID is exclusively online, and so there's interesting conversations I think about being able to supervise online, practice online, teach online, and the extent to which that's actually effective and useful. As good as or not good as, when it's useful, when it's beneficial, when maybe is it not. And I'm a father of 4. So I've introduced myself extensively, but I'd have to take a step back to acknowledge country, to acknowledge the peoples of the Darug Nation as the traditional custodians of this country, and to pay my respects. Oops, I had to go back to you. Okay. and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, not emerging, for their enduring custodianship of these lands and waters. And in the spirit of acknowledgement, and I always do this now when I do an acknowledgement of country, I would also like to acknowledge your ancestors and elders, as well as the past and present elders of your professions, our professions, for the challenges that they overcame, so as to enable all of us to be here right now. So really the starting point is that Johanna and I are here today on behalf of PACFA. PACFA is a national professional association, originally in fact a federation of psychotherapy and counselling professional associations from throughout Australia, constituting a diverse group of professionals who share a sense of identity as persons who practice a distinct and knowable source of healing and change to an agreed minimum standard. PACFA is a registered charity, and it exists to serve the profession and the communities that that profession then serves. This is a federation that has built a reputation for high standards and high integrity. It is made up of a membership that demands to be consulted on the decisions that affect it. So when I first became chair of the PACFA board, I had been on the board for a couple of years, but I still really hadn't got my head around the full complexity of the beast that is PACFA. So we made some mind maps, and they were compelling enough to be graphically put together. And it just shows that this is who we are. We have branches, we have colleges, we have interest groups, we have a board, we've got a range of board reporting committees, we have a staff reporting to our CEO, Johanna, we've got our stakeholders, of which you are one. And we've still got a number of member associations, so we are still technically a federation. And so this is a professional body that's been around now for 25 years. And I'd like to think that we've matured to the point where we are fit to lead the profession into any future that you or any other stakeholder might imagine. This is a professional body that exists, has always existed, and will always exist, we hope, for the benefit of the profession and its members. Nevertheless, the future into which PACFA and our professions will grow is part of a much larger historical trajectory that we collectively are now in a position to influence. For us in Australia, this history takes the form of more than 65,000 years of unbroken Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and civilization, followed by just 65,000 years, followed by just 235 years of European colonisation, and even more recently, an immigration policy that is creating the culturally and ethnically diverse Australia of tomorrow. In the most recent 125 years, our professions have been cobbling together ancient and emerging wisdoms and combining them with traditional healing practices and the latest scientific evidence to create the wide range of therapies that we practice today. So there I'm referencing both Freud and Jung, who drew their inspiration from ancient mythologies, and also the top there, I think it was Kim who said, oh, neuroscience geek. I'm a neuroscience geek. Neuroscience is great. A lot of the other stuff I can leave, but neuroscience, when neuroscience started out, we started taking neuroscience. This is important. This is important to psychotherapy and counselling because it's showing us what happens when we do what we do. What I find really interesting about our professions and the philosophies that underpin them is that they sit far more comfortably with Australia's Indigenous philosophies than do the reductionist perspectives that dominate the health sector, including our psychologist cousins. In contemporary Australia, we have an incredible opportunity, I believe, to learn from the philosophies and practices of our Indigenous peoples and to evolve our profession into a form that is uniquely adapted to meet the needs of Australians. Counsellors will, of course, continue to play an important role in the reparation of ongoing psychological and emotional and social harms done to the original peoples and cultures of these lands. Counsellors will also continue to support the collaborative movement of the entire nation towards mutually beneficial reconciliation, very timely, given what's happening tomorrow in this country and the lead up to it. Before I go further and talk about the profession, I should make some definitions. So I use the term counsellor here to refer collectively to counsellors, psychotherapists, and wherever relevant and appropriate, also to Indigenous healing practitioners. For those that don't know, PACFA has a CATSIP, a College of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Healing Practitioners. So they are very much a part of where we see our future. We are all therapists. For us at PACFA, what this means, this term counsellor means, is that it means that we have confirmed the attainment of a minimum standard of an AQF level 7 or above counselling related qualification, 750 hours of client-focused experience, and 75 hours of supervision. That's what it takes to be a registered clinical counsellor at PACFA. That is, for us, the minimum standard. I want to be very clear when I talk about psychotherapists and counsellors. I think I mentioned this earlier. Psychotherapists do counselling. Counsellors do psychotherapy. There is no more debate around that. And nevertheless, it's okay that counsellors are not necessarily psychotherapists. When I talk about the profession, I'm talking about both registered counsellors and the broader sector of horizontally and vertically integrated stakeholders they practice with me. This includes the students who are working towards meeting the minimum standards of training and competency, the training providers that are training them to the minimum standard, the employers wishing to employ registered counsellors, and recipients of counselling services. I refer to recipients of counselling services in this presentation as participants. The language around this is a challenge to consumers, to clients. Every time I use any of this language, we go, oh, that's, you know, what about this? What about that? So we've got impact. We've got an interest group. The interest group of the gender body pinch, the diversity and gender body kinship and sexuality interest group. And I talk about them as my tutors in category PC. So they are very tuned in. So participants is the word I'll use. I'll use the terms psychosocial services, which is something that I picked up from hanging out with Mental Health Australia at Parliament House a month ago, realising that that's how they refer to what we do. And so talking about language, it's important that we talk about ourselves the way that they want to talk about us, and we're able to position ourselves accordingly. And I use the term counselling interchangeably with psychosocial services. And this describes the growing diversity of contexts in which counsellors' skills might be utilised. So, the future, what can we predict? What can we see? What can we know? We're on a trajectory. Australia and the entire world is experiencing a dramatic change in demographic from relatively young and then dead to relatively old and then slowly dying, with an expectation that more than 20% of the Australian population will be over the age of 65 by 2070. An ageing population, the majority of them women, will need many things, and it is increasingly recognised that one of those things is someone to connect with for professional psychosocial support. Someone who can listen, understand, and assist a person to reconcile the history of their lived experience before the end of their time on this earth has come. We can also predict the rise of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We have an important role in supporting Australians to experience justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in all facets of their lives. Counsellors, in fact, are already playing a lead role in supporting the diverse experiences of ability and embodiment, neurodiversity and personality, ethnicity and culture, gender and sexuality, kinship and family, age and ageing, religion and spirituality, class and status. Climate change. This is also predictable on our inevitable historical trajectory. Rising global temperatures resulting in significant climatic disruptions. Here in Australia, we can prepare for predicted catastrophic fires, floods, drought, and cyclones, and their widespread consequences. As these occur, impacted Australians will be in need of a well-distributed network of affordable, effective supports for both crisis response and long-term psychosocial recovery. Empiricism, touched on this earlier today. Our profession is currently at a point in its historical trajectory where empiricism has emerged as the dominant narrative of knowledge. This narrative demands that non-empirical models of helping conform to evidence-based manualised treatment protocols, as if all helpers must also be scientist practitioners. While needing to train counsellors to speak this common language, in the future, not only have we collectively faced this narrative and its implications, we have found effective ways to counter or embrace it. Clearly communicating what is already known about the safety and efficacy of counselling to those that need to hear it. We have also done what's necessary to ensure that our training, accreditation, and registration processes guarantee that safety and efficacy. And together, we have collaborated to produce the research necessary to put to bed any lingering concerns around the efficacy of our professions. The online world, touched on this as well today. COVID lockdowns have locked in a new era of remote working, remote learning, and remote service provision. We must change with the times. PACFA has engaged a research team at the University of Southern Queensland to review the literature relating to the efficacy of online learning for counselling and psychotherapy. The early indications of this research are that our profession will be increasingly embracing the reality of a world mediated via online technologies, with codes of ethics, training standards, and training program accreditation requirements being adjusted and updated accordingly. Artificial intelligence, this has also been foreshadowed. We can predict the rise of artificial intelligence technologies. In the future, these technologies have upturned the labour market and created an environment of widespread reinvention as human beings are forced to reconsider their contributions to the labour market. Counsellors have an important role to play in supporting these individual and collective reinventions within government, direct contracts, and the growing employee assistance market. We can also predict that AI is likely to disrupt the provision of counselling and other health services that have historically been provided by a human intermediary, including medicine and psychology. Artificial intelligence may well prove to be as good as, if not better than humans, in providing technically based, question and answer mediated services, psychosocial services. On the one hand, counsellors will need to differentiate themselves by further highlighting the relational nature and therefore benefit of their services, and on the other, by embracing the possibilities of AI for their work and capitalising on it. I also wanted to make a comment based on what I saw from Nathan this morning. AI gets it wrong. I don't know if anybody else knows, but I noticed because I'm here for PACFA, that underneath Deakin University, it said, make sure that your training provider, your training program is accredited by the ACA, the peak body for counselling in Australia. So the rest of you might go, oh yeah. But with PACFA, we'll be like, what? You can't say that. Because, and I got the same response when I spoke to ChatGPT. So I'll just see what I think. So on the surface level, AI is just web surfing. It's just web surfing, and it picks up the same sorts of biases that we all do. And it has the same limitations. I don't believe that ACA is the peak body for counselling in Australia, but it says it is. Yeah, and ChatGPT picks up the marketing and says, oh, marketing is fact. Gets it wrong. I had a conversation with ChatGPT. It's quite bizarre. Anybody who sort of starts talking to AI, you end up having conversations. I said, oh, look, you mentioned the Australian Counselling Association, the ACA, but not PACFA. Why is that? ChatGPT. I apologise for not mentioning the Psychotherapy and Counselling Federation of Australia in my response. PACFA is indeed a significant and reputable professional association in Australia that plays a crucial role in regulating and accrediting counsellors and psychotherapists. PACFA sets high standards for training, ethics, and professional practice within the counselling and psychotherapy fields. Both the Australian Counselling Association and PACFA are essential organisations in the Australian counselling and psychotherapy landscape, and individuals seeking counselling services or considering a career in counselling may encounter professionals affiliated with both of these organisations. Both associations work to ensure the quality and ethical standards of counselling and psychotherapy services in Australia. ChatGPT, this is quite. Thank you for pointing out the importance of including PACFA in the context of counselling in Australia. It is essential for individuals to be aware of the various professional bodies and their roles in maintaining the integrity of counselling and psychotherapy practices in the country. Thank you, ChatGPT. So, in looking at the vision, I'm wanting to adopt multiple perspectives. And it's a challenge. It's easy to have our own perspective, but it's a real challenge to put ourselves in the position of others. And I think as counsellors, it's something that we're actually trained to do. So I'm going to have a go and see how we go. Maybe I'll get something right, maybe I'll get things wrong. But the sector is broad. And these multiple perspectives need to be considered when imagining our shared future. We have, and these are the perspectives I'm going to be looking at, registered counsellors, training providers, employers, students of counselling, including prospective students, the participants in counselling services themselves, governments, other non-government funders, other professionals, and us as the professional bodies. In the future, we see that there is a clear separation in the minds of all stakeholders. In fact, we believe that there needs to be a clear separation in the minds of all the sector stakeholders between vocationally trained counsellors and registered clinical counsellors. This isn't intended to devalue vocationally trained counsellors, but merely to distinguish. A distinction that in the future is maintained by separate registers bestowing approved titles, clearly distinguishable by all stakeholders. So the titles don't have to be protected, they just have to be collectively approved by the sector and consistently adhered to. It may also be beneficial, may also be mutually beneficial for these distinctions to be separately represented by distinct professional bodies. As PACFA doesn't currently register vocationally trained counsellors, this vision we are sharing today is for registered clinical counsellors as defined. So in the future, we can imagine that registered clinical counsellors feel secure in their identity and confident in holding professional roles within increasingly diverse settings, with an increasingly diverse range of participants and presentations. It's really tempting here to list all of the possible places and all of the possible populations to whom counsellors will be making a meaningful contribution. But the list is just far too long. So suffice to say that counselling and counsellors will continue to meet the needs of individuals and groups and families in all aspects of human suffering and the potential for growth. In the future, counsellors will have a clear sense of common early career pathways, as well as in their ability to develop flexibly and creatively define their own unique areas of practice. Counsellors feel known and valued by all sector stakeholders for their core professional identity, as well as for any specialist professional identities that are significant to them. These might include specialist mental health counselling, psychotherapy, including its distinct modalities, supervision, relationship counselling, group work, music therapy, drama therapy, dance therapy, creative arts therapies, Indigenous healing practices, elder therapies for elder populations, gender and sexual diversity counselling, and counselling for children and young people. So counsellors will have the opportunity to be distinct in their identities. Counsellors will feel well supported by their professional associations, their training providers, their employers, governments, and other professionals to become the best versions of themselves. And they have safe spaces in which to connect with, support, and inspire them. Aspiring counsellors. In the future, aspiring counsellors and students feel confident that their training pathway will lead them towards relevant professional registration and their career goals. Aspiring counsellors feel confident that they have chosen a career pathway that is both fulfilling and rewarding, and are clear about possible roles, working conditions, economic remuneration, and opportunities for career advancement. They also have safe spaces in which to connect with, support, and inspire one another, not just within their training environments, but across training environments. Their training providers have a clear and consistent understanding of how to meet nationally consistent training standards. Their training providers, that's you, feel valued as a part of a cohesive profession, integrated within a progressive wider sector, confident in your ability to educate and train counsellors to meet the approved standards and to do so consistently. You feel empowered to support meaningful research programs that promote the high value of counselling and counselling research more broadly throughout national and international academic, educational, political and service provision landscapes. Participants in counselling services continue to be challenged in the future by the emerging complex of social and environmental issues affecting their lives, and they increasingly seek out effective means of coming to terms with and optimising their unique lived experiences. They understand and appreciate the difference that counselling can bring to their lives and have confidence in the abilities and professionalism of their treating counsellor. Participants also accurately assume that there is an effective and supportive mechanism for resolving any issues that they experience while working with their counsellor. So employment projections are that we are going to, that our sector, our broader healthcare and social assistance sector is going to grow massively over the next 5 years. So we can predict that future employers are increasingly in need of a skilled workforce to meet the demands of an ageing population and the trend towards individuals and families seeking external support for their psychosocial challenges. Employers find themselves under pressure to prioritise the competing needs of efficacy and affordability in service provision and consistently see counsellors as an effective solution to this problem. They have a clear understanding of and confidence in the abilities and the professionalism of counsellors. They know that counsellors are quality and they know that counsellors are safe. They routinely include counselling qualifications and registration in their position requirements for every role in which a counsellor might be appropriate. Employers have a clear, moving on to government. Last month, Johanna and I attended the Mental Health Australia Parliamentary Advocacy Day in Parliament House, Canberra. There we heard from Mark Butler MP, who is the Federal Minister for Health and Aged Care, who had the following to say about the National Mental Health Workforce Strategy, which has been released earlier this week. He said that the government's aspiration for participants experiencing mental health challenges is wraparound care provided by multidisciplinary teams. He shared that the biggest obstacle to meeting this aspiration is workforce supply. He specifically cited the lack of psychosocial supports within the system for lower socioeconomic participants. He said that better access has not been good at providing participants with equitable service provision. And he said that the government rejected lobbying by psychologists for an additional 10 Medicare funded sessions, specifically on the basis that the government could not be confident that this funding would support the people who need the help to get the help that they need. It is clear then that the government's vision for the future of the sector is for the efficient provision of psychosocial services through a safe and effective mental health workforce that offers diverse therapeutic possibilities to best meet participants' needs. COVID, in addition, has forever changed the landscape of mental health service provision in Australia, and in fact globally, by triggering a wholesale change in society's views on mental health and therapeutic services. There are currently insufficient psychologists to meet demand. So now both psychologists and governments are calling on counsellors to take their rightful place in the workforce. So the future is almost here. With national standards, a reliable system of registration, and high trust in the integrity of the regulator, funders and employers will feel increasingly confident in recruiting registered counsellors to suitable roles. We can follow this trajectory further into a future in which governments at all levels have counsellors front of mind when considering how to address psychosocial issues. A future in which the profession has a seat at the table in discussions relevant to any of the services that counsellors can deliver. And governments at all levels are keen to invest in the future of counselling. In this future, non-government sources of funding, research and advocacy, like Beyond Blue and the Black Dog Institute, also have counsellors front of mind. They invite the profession to take part in discussions relevant to psychosocial service delivery, and they are also keen to invest in the future of counselling. A really significant part of our future is other professionals. Other health professionals in this future, like psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, occupational therapists, general practitioners, nurses, NDIS support coordinators, have confidence in the abilities and professionalism of counsellors. They understand, value and respect the different roles that they and counsellors can play in meeting with applicants. They have confidence in the ability of counsellors to collaborate as colleagues in multidisciplinary teams, and they have counsellors front of mind when considering how best to provide psychosocial services to participants. And so finally, what do we then imagine for the professional bodies in this future? How are they regulating the profession and its members? So in this future, the professional bodies are effectively supporting a regulatory environment in which all stakeholders are enabled to meet the needs of the sector. As the professional body, we help training providers to understand what is required to meet the national standards, to feel valued as part of a cohesive profession, to feel part of a progressive wider sector, and to feel confident in their ability to consistently educate and train counsellors to the approved standards. To this end, PACFA is currently engaged in a project that is exploring the possibility of adopting the UK's recently developed scope of practice and education for psychotherapy and counselling for the Australian context. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. This project took the UK many years to put together, to brainstorm, to bicker about, to finally come up with a document. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we do need to make sure that it is fit for Australia's roads. We as the professional body also create systems and processes that support painless, efficient and effective training program accreditation for both core and advanced accreditation pathways. For this reason, the PACFA board has recently dissolved our outdated education program accreditation function, known as EPAC, and recruited the incredibly talented Lee Robinson, fresh from a number of years with the Australian Psychology Accreditation Council and the Australian Dental Council, to work with you and the sector to create a fit-for-purpose accreditation process that meets the needs of training providers and the wider sector. We provide high-quality, respected, international academic journals for the publication of research relevant to the professions of counselling. We, as the professional body, help aspiring counsellors to feel confident that they can find and navigate a pathway to a career that is personally fulfilling and rewarding. And we provide them with a safe space in which to connect with, support, and inspire one another. PACFA has recently launched an online space that will be able to be occupied by student members who are wanting to ask questions, but they can have their questions answered and where they can collaborate, a space that's separate from the social media platforms. We help participants to understand and appreciate the value that counselling can bring to their lives, to feel safe and confident in the abilities and professionalism of their training counsellors, and to have access to an effective pathway for resolving disputes with their counsellor. We help employers to think of counsellors when solving their service delivery problems, to have confidence in the abilities and professionalism of counsellors, and to include counsellors wherever they have the appropriate knowledge and skills. It's our job to help government and non-government sources of funding, together with other health professions, to keep counsellors front of mind when considering how best to address psychosocial issues, to have confidence in the abilities and professionalism of counsellors, to value and respect the diverse roles that counsellors can play, and to routinely include counsellors in all levels of decision-making. First and foremost, however, the regulatory bodies of the future ensure that counsellors themselves feel safe and confident in providing their services in diverse contexts to diverse populations on a level playing field. We ensure that they are secure in knowing that they are valued by both participants and sector stakeholders. We ensure that they experience a sense of identity and value for their specialist knowledge and skills, and feel supported by a professional association that meets their needs. We also make sure that they can trust that their professional association will always plan for and act in their best interests. Thank you. With that, I will get Johanna to come and talk about the reality of the situation. It's nice to be able to live in the dream.
Just think it might move this forward a little bit. So
It won't. We try. We don't. I tried that. I managed to get 3 inches out of it. And any more is going to lead to disaster.
okay, let's not pull any cords out of the wall. So I will grab my water. Sometimes when we're planning these kinds of presentations, we think about how it's going to come across for you and how it's going to present. And I must admit, I do feel a little bit like bad cop coming up to good cop with Nigel. He does such a great job of capturing, the opportunity and the possibilities that I come through with the other. Now I need to see that.
We all need to play our roles.
Yes. I'm just trying to work out. I was going to be over there, but okay, you'll have to excuse me. I'm going to be looking this way a bit. Now, just as Nigel did, but probably not as beautifully, I'll start by introducing myself. I am not a counsellor. And I say that as I admit my vulnerability up front. It's very scary talking to a group of experts about something that you've been working on. What I have been doing for 20, 25 years is working in communications, advocacy, government relations, and specifically for the last 10 years in health membership organisations. So what I am an expert in is probably workforce strategy, seeing how the pieces of information around what happens on the ground operates at a kind of policy level, and then trying to work out what does that present for us in terms of opportunities, and where does that, what can we do with that? I'm a pragmatist, but I'm also an optimist, and I'm really very optimistic about the opportunities we have. The second thing I would say is that we're covering a lot of the ground that's already been discussed today, which gives me great enthusiasm. We're all sort of on the same page, as we move forward anyway. So that's a really good place to kind of start. And we will just...
Use the arrows.
Arrows? Yes. So I'm going to be starting with these are kind of the key questions that I'm covering. And I do this because I think it's great to have a vision, but at the same time, we need to know where we are. And then we can work out what our next steps are. So that's kind of where we're going. And that's what I was asked to address. The one thing I will say is I'm actually really disappointed that ACA isn't here, because I actually think it would be really important we have these conversations across a bigger group of people. And I feel a little bit apprehensive about the fact that this is just a whole lot of PACFA. So I'm sorry about that, but I welcome other comments and feedback, and hopefully we'll have another opportunity for that conversation another time. All right, so I'm going to start right with what I want to share with you. And that is that when I joined PACFA as the CEO 2.5 years ago, I was super excited. I had a wonderful conversation with the board. It was a rigorous process. I'd previously been working with hospital pharmacists, which was a very under-recognised group of medicine specialists. And prior to that, I'd been with the College of Psychiatrists. I've long had a passion for mental health. So I was tremendously excited to take on this job. And one of the thoughts that was going around in my head was, wait a second, what is happening in counselling? We see there's enormous enthusiasm for talk therapy. There's growing enthusiasm for mental health. Why am I not hearing more about these areas? And so when I came in, what I did was I opened my door and I spoke to many people in this room, but I also just had a general open door policy. I said, if you're a member or if you're not a member and you've got things you want to say, please come and tell me, because, I'm coming in as a fresh slate. I don't know that much about how this sector works on the ground. And it was really, I started out thinking, well, maybe people are just having a bad day. Oh, maybe I'm just speaking to a few people who have had a bit of bad luck and things are just not working quite the way that they planned. But over the course of 2.5 years, I've got to say that I've come to the conclusion that we're in a really tricky spot at the moment. And I'm interested. I'm sharing this with you all today so that I can hear your feedback on that. I'm not presenting that as a fait accompli. But what I am saying is that the feedback that I've had from members on a day-to-day basis, the feedback that comes through our membership team, and keep in mind that we have 15,000 phone calls a year and more than 20,000 emails. The feedback that I've had in in the evidence that we've gathered, the reports that have come out of the various parts of government, and all point to a picture, which is that the profession at the moment is struggling. And, you know, we're talking about a high level of underutilisation. We have this incredibly skilled workforce, and so the good news. Okay, let's start with the good news. Good news is that people want you. People want your graduates. Everyone's interested. Everyone agrees that talking therapy is important. And I think if we were to reflect back on 10 years ago, when psychology was really hitting its stride, things have actually tilted a bit more in the counselling direction. You know, there's a recognition now, and certainly with the current government, there's recognition now that psychology cannot solve all the problems. You know, and there's a, you know, I think, and even with neuroscience, there was a briefly simplistic moment with the idea that all we need to do is get the right CBT button and everyone will be solved, but that clearly hasn't worked. So there's a much greater kind of recognition and agreement that a wide range of personal-centered theories are needed. And, you know, post-COVID, we are seeing an increased investment in the structures to deliver funding to counsellors to enable people to get access to those services. We are seeing private health insurers come on board who weren't previously interested. We've had workers' compensation groups come on board in the last 12 months that weren't there previously. We are seeing, you know, the increased growth of EAPs is clear. And realistically, the amazing growth in the acceptability of help-seeking behaviour only helps counselling. We are seeing ongoing growth in the number of people looking for help in a wide range of services, and seeking counsellors, and even having counsellors in that question is a part of that. And for this, you know, you know, it's a little bit of a punch in the gut. So, you know, I'm quite happy to kind of talk to anyone in more detail about this afterwards. But there are significant difficulties facing our members and the broader sector. Nathan Deal's excellent work showed that 27% of the jobs that were advertised as counselling jobs, registered counsellors weren't even eligible. Now, I know we're kind of all a bit used to that, but I want you to really sit with it. That doesn't happen in other sectors. You don't have dentists not able to apply for dentist jobs, or doctors not able to apply for doctor jobs. Like this, you know, this is something very unique and unusual. You know, I spoke to a team leader of an organisation just 3 or 4 weeks ago, actually. Call centre, 200 counsellor jobs, 50 to 75% of his workforce are social workers. And he came to me, we'll talk about this one a little bit later on, saying, we really like counsellors. We really want more counsellors. We can't get enough qualified counsellors for these jobs. I said, well, that's very strange, because I know lots and lots of excellent counsellors. So we can talk about what that mismatch is. But the point is, that's, you know, that's 150 jobs that are just not going anywhere near the people who are theoretically qualified for them, and the people who want them and who have trained for them. So in itself, that's actually quite scary. EAPs have reported a strong trend of employers preferring other professions. So this is the background of the Converge paper that you may be aware of, which showed fantastically that counsellors were better at providing EAP services and resulted in higher client satisfaction scores. The reason that paper was done was because people were coming into Converge and saying, and this is at the beginning of their contract negotiations, they would say, oh, well, our people only want to see psychologists, or we only want our people to see psychologists. And Converge got so frustrated and annoyed by this, because when that is made, when that is declared at the start of contract negotiations, it's not something they can argue. It's setting the terms of their engagement. So they produced this paper, you know, effectively advocating for us to show why that was a flawed theory. But the very fact that that even got off the ground, that was necessary, is in itself quite concerning. The NDIA rebates for counsellors dropped last year. Like everyone else's went up. Counsellors went from allied health professionals down to, well, they went down to the vocational level. They went down to a level of reimbursement that is the same as vocational professions. But unfortunately, there's only one counselling line, and it's the same for all professions. There's only one line for any of them, really. So all counsellors who work with NDIA clients are reimbursed at a vocational level. And that's obviously a problem when you have a huge variety in your workforce. More recently, private health insurers are picking and choosing who to rebate. You know, we've taken a bit of heat for this personally because qualifications are varied and different. And because people, you know, ideally a registration level should be what the private health insurer trusts. And instead of that, they're going and doing their own little kind of analysis. Problem with that is they've got administrative staff who know nothing about counselling, for whom counselling is only one part of their job. You know, they also organise the rebates for physiotherapists and for all the different things. So expecting them to upskill is unrealistic. Okay. Now, taking it to the obvious, better access. We have half the market for talk therapy subsidised and half the market not. So when we talk about access to talk therapies and the difficulty for people working in private practice, we're actually talking about market failure. It's not that the practitioners are bad. It's actually, the market has been distorted by the introduction of rebates. And I'm sure you all know, but certainly one of the things that I talk about quite a bit to government is the stories of people who had flourishing private practices with 4 or 5 rooms in 2006. And the closing down of that. What that meant for people's businesses, what that meant for people's jobs and livelihoods, what that's meant for the profession overall. That's really quite devastating. I had someone say to me the other day, just as a matter of fact, well, you just can't make a living as a counsellor. And we know that that's not true for everyone, but the point is that it is true for some groups. So what we've effectively had happen, I think, is that we've got a division of the workforce. We've got some people who are doing really, really well, and they're either people who've got a lot of get up and go, they've got really good marketing now, so they know how to self-promote, they've got good professional networks, they've got high training. And then we've also got a whole range of people who haven't got that. And in some degree, in some places it's divided by when they came out of university, you know, pre-2010, more established, post-2010, have found things consistently difficult. But also I'm finding people who are really, really well established and who run really, really well, good businesses for a long time are finding that it's getting harder rather than easier. So I think that's in itself, that's an unusual workforce pattern. That's not what we would expect. And COVID was a really good example of it, because if anything should have blown demand for counselling out of the water during COVID. I mean, your nearest competitor, the psychologist, had 6 to 12 month waiting lists. The flow over should have been easy. And in fact, when I did my interview for this role, one of the things that I did was track through Google the search results for counselling versus psychology. Psychology went like this. Counselling went. So it was just, you know, why would that be the case? What's happened in that situation where the community hasn't responded as strongly as we would have expected? And the final point goes to our workforce survey, which is a tremendous piece of work, which articulated that the majority of our members, who are incredibly highly trained and have amazing skills that are greatly valued by the community, earn less than the average income and would welcome more hours of work. And I think to put this in context, we're talking less than $75,000 a year. You know, so I mean, the average salary is $90,000. So you know, and so the fact that we have these amazingly highly qualified people and they're not at that level, they're not secure. I think that speaks to a lot of the concern that we find in the membership. And so it's not bad for everyone. I'm not saying that it is for a second, but at PACFA, we find ourselves on the front line. We get lots and lots of phone calls, lots of emails. We get people who are really despairing. You know, and that's really sad and really difficult. And I mean, to a degree, maybe we get the calls from people who aren't doing so well because the people who are doing well, they're off over there, they don't need to call us. So I'm not denying that. But when we come to talk about this in a collective space, I thought this was a really interesting consideration, particularly because, you know, you're looking to recruit for the future. And this is about the future of the profession after all. So, you know, these are all kind of things that we welcome a conversation about. That's what we're here for today. So PACFA's fundamental purpose is registration. And I think it's a really interesting one because it's at the heart of what we have to offer. It's at the heart of the solution in many ways, but it's also unknown. The total number of currently registered counsellors is up in the air. you've got our annual report that shows you how many we have. The rest of the information is kind of, well, we can't get hold of it. One of the reasons I was hoping ACA would be here is because I could ask them. But, you know, there's, you know, in most workforce areas, you can get the government figures. All the information is contributed more broadly. One of the other things is that the current number of graduates is not known. That was a question that I asked Nathan a couple of weeks ago. I was like, oh, you've got this national heads group. You know, have we got numbers of how many students you've all got? You know, and that information wasn't collected either. So I think there's something interesting in there about the fact that we don't know what we don't know. You know, there is no agreed definition of a registered counsellor. When PACFA says registered counsellor, they mean one thing. When ACA says registered counsellor, they mean something else. That, while that might be fine for us, that's probably not great for other people because they don't particularly want to spend their brain getting around that. Scopes of practice are very diverse and different, varied. When people say counsellor, they can be referring to anything from someone who can join a multidisciplinary team to someone who works in recovery, to someone who works in wellbeing, to someone who works in a range of different particular settings. They're all very, very valuable areas, but it is difficult to advocate for a profession when there is so much variance around what's going on in there. The standards are all over the place, and it's not just PACFA and ACA. There is at least 8 different organisations who register and represent people in this space. So sometimes I feel like I spend every day just trying to learn about new people who are doing new things. You would all be aware that we have introduced a criminal history check, and that is, I think we were the first organisation to do that, but I think positively that will roll out across everyone else as well. So I just want to, you know, knock one bird on the head with a stone. Self-regulation is not the problem itself. You know, it's well accepted and it works effectively for other allied health professions. If it doesn't work for us, then possibly that's because of all that variance I was just discussing. It's not the fact that we are not with AHPRA. You know, it's the difficulties inherent in having a cooperative, collaborative system. If you don't cooperate, and you're not collaborative, it doesn't work. Okay. There is some really exciting work happening behind the scenes around NASRAC, which is the National Alliance of Self-Regulated Health Professionals, and we anticipate that there will be some serious shift around a joint agreement around regulation and quality assurance for counselling and psychotherapy, among other allied health professions. We were never going to be big enough to drive change in the sector by ourselves, but there is a huge wave of reform coming through in response to the interest and engagement of the Minister, as Nigel described. So we can ride that wave to make sure that our members get appropriate recognition and support as part of that model. And just to point out the obvious, you know, if someone said to us, well, we will fund you, or we will do this, or, you know, I don't think there would be anyone, whilst people have reservation about AHPRA specifically, PACFA is not holding our ground to protect our membership model at all cost. If AHPRA was the best model for the profession, we would be very happy to work with that. So when we talk about registration, fundamentally, we're talking about community safety. And so that's something I just want to flag for people. When we go out and talk about what does PACFA do, we get trapped in these conversations about what does PACFA do for me? Well, I want that, and that's fair enough. But realistically, at the end of the day, PACFA exists to articulate that your practice is safe for the community. That's what we do for you. It's not very sexy, it's not very fun. You know, it doesn't involve a whole lot of EAPs or, you know, some fancy other stuff, although I would like it to. We're working towards those. Fundamentally, what we do is attest to the quality of your graduates so that they can get work and so that they can work with the community. And recently, we've just done an audit of all the information that's available for the healthcare from the healthcare commissioners across the country. The information is a little bit patchy, but over the last 10 years, there's been 32 counsellors / psychotherapists who have been prohibited from practice or sanctioned. It is a thing, it does happen, and only 4 of them were ever registered with PACFA. So anyone who says that registration standards don't matter should think about that a little bit more. That is, 4 is about 12% of 32, whereas PACFA's membership is actually about 32% of the workforce. us having standards means that we are far less likely to register people who end up in situations where sanctions are justified. That's the point of registration and indeed the point of standards. Employment. Now, I think employment is really, well, obviously employment is really important, mostly because we get lots of phone calls about it. So yeah, that's where my bias is, that's where our squeaky wheel is. We hear from a lot of people who find it really hard to get employment. Now, and I had a chat to Nathan after his paper came through. And I really wanted to, he suggested I raise this point for you, basically. He said, it's good to take to the heads, go take it there. Everyone's gonna love this. So we are increasingly seeing recruitment for mental health worker counsellor positions based on the completion of a 3-year degree. What that means, and this goes back to the call centre that I mentioned to you before, that means that the vast majority of our members are not eligible for work. It's like a really clumsy kind of situation, you know? The reason they go for a 3-year degree is because that's what the other professions have. We can go in one by one, argue with them. No, counselling's different. This is why it's special, blah, blah, blah. And we do that. But there's some things that are worth thinking about the system. You know, how can we work better with the system? Eligibility for most private health rebates, government funded session employment, all is the same. And even when it comes down to the name of courses, like we've recently had a whole lot of really disappointed members who've been knocked back from private health insurers because their course was called psychotherapy, even though it was fundamentally a counselling course in terms of curriculum. They got knocked back because the people at the private health insurer don't understand what psychotherapy is, and they got an agreement to introduce counselling into their insurance fund, and that's what they've done. None of this other stuff. You know, we've got people who can't get private health insurance registration because they've done a master's of Gestalt therapy. And the private health insurer is like, I don't know what that is. That sounds like, you know, dentistry, mechanics. Like they've, you know, so there's this idea that I think sometimes there's an assumption that other people actually know a lot more about the work than they do. Sometimes my suggestion, I mean, we had an amazing practitioner that I was speaking to a lot a couple of years ago because she was desperate for a job. And she just could not seem to get over the line anywhere. And eventually I said to her, update your CV. Where it says Masters of Gestalt Therapy, put in brackets next to it, counselling. She got a job. Like it was that, so, you know, it was that silly. And I'm not saying that these are great, you know, we can push back on these, but there's also just a bit of understanding the challenges that people are kind of facing. So, well, where are the jobs going? That's the question. What actually is happening? So if you look at this is so using the publicly available figures from other professions, which kind of goes to my previous point. I had a look at the Psychology Board and the Australian Association of Social Work, and I dug through their figures. Social workers have nearly doubled over about 10 or 15 years. And psychologists, as we know, continue to grow from strength to strength. But interestingly enough, in those little sections to the side, the accredited mental health social workers have increased by 65% over the last 10 years. Now, the psychologists are holding steady with their endorsed area of practice. That's only about 2% of their members, and it hasn't grown significantly. But what has happened, which you all know, I know I'm talking to people who know more about this and have been, you know, in deeper in it than I have. What has happened is the enormous growth of psychologists providing counselling without any counselling training, which really, you know, is probably the biggest challenge for the profession overall. Because when we've got people who aren't counsellors calling themselves counsellors, and then when you look at the numbers and they're actually bigger than the counsellors, then you start to think, okay, this is really difficult. Now, the point I want to make about the size there, counselling and psychotherapy doesn't have any numbers in it because we don't have numbers. But I estimate, based on the ACA's publicly available figures and our figures, that the registered counsellor group would be about 12,000. And I based that on the 14,000 that ACA report publicly, or they had a website after I checked, minus 30% diploma members, which is what I was told by a member of ACA or staff member of ACA at some point, minus 40% of students. And I use the 40% of students because we have 40% of students and they have free student membership and we have free student membership. So I'm just sort of paralleling the numbers there. That's actually a lot smaller than what is often bandied around. And I think it actually speaks to a churn. There's a high level of churn in the first couple of years. A lot of people come out of courses, they register for a couple of years, they don't get a job, they can't run private practice, and then they drop off. So, you know, that's something for PACFA to really think about how we can support those people. And at the moment, my thinking is to get them into a job. But, you know, that's something that we all need to think about from a bigger picture because it has massive implications for training as well, of course. But the point is there that we are the smallest of the three, and that's not going to change anytime soon. When you're the smallest of the three, you need to approach your problems differently. So we need to be strategic and we need to understand what's going on in those other sectors so that we can work. We don't need to be differential. We don't need to be less than. I would argue that we need to be more confident in our specialisation. And this is something that I actually disagree with about what Nathan said, because I agree with most of the things he says most of the time. The whole thing is, oh, psychologists, the psychologist counsel, social work counsel. What's the point of counsellors? I'm like, no, you're better at it. If you're not better at it, then what is the point of all the training? You have the most highly valued skill. You know, and I think that's something that we should be, you know, we can acknowledge these other groups. Yes, it's great that you're in the workforce and you've got a job as a counsellor. Really pleased for you, but I've got training. I can supervise you, I can support you, I can manage your team's skill development. So I think, you know, we're allowing, I mean, they have other skills that we don't have. We can acknowledge that gracefully, but you should be very proud of your counselling expertise and specialisation. One of the things that I encounter quite a bit is employers just don't like us. Employers, you know, they're pro-medical model, they don't like us. Nobody likes counsellors. We're just, you know, we're just a bit unlucky. And I find that very strange because counsellors have amazing relational skills, which we all know are highly valued. So it kind of doesn't make any sense. Counsellors should be more invited to more parties, all of you, than other professions. So when I spoke to employers about what's going on, why are they prioritising these 3-year qualifications, why are they not employing counsellors, these are the kinds of reasons that I get. It's difficult to include counsellors with less training in a multidisciplinary team because the other people on the team don't know how to deal with them. You know, and also these are people who have invariably invested years and years, if not decades, of their own life in training. So it's asking a lot of them to say, this person has significantly less training than you, but we want you to treat them as an expert in their field. And I think that's just acknowledging human nature. It's particularly difficult when pay is tied to training. And, you know, that becomes quite demoralising for everyone. We see that in awards. The awards are all over the place. And they don't recognise counsellors and support them in the way they should. And then it's also, if people make it into the team, they don't get the opportunity to progress. They don't get to be the team manager, they don't get to be the department lead. And this is really interesting because even if you look at the medical space, allied health profession, other allied health professions are really jumping up the ranks. You know, like you have OTs who are now the head of, I know a pharmacist who's now the head of medical at the Alfred Hospital. You know, you have OTs who are the head of the emergency clinic. You have physios who are the head of allied health services. So there is a pathway through which allied health professionals are getting ahead in those settings. But for some reason, often counsellors are not able to make those same leaps. And this, you know, this is the reality of it is the length of training. It may not matter in terms of what people actually have, but it matters in terms of perception or you know, that's the way that our education and training system has worked. You're a specialist doctor after you've done the general doctor stuff and you're done being a specialist. You're a specialist lawyer if you've done the advanced training. You know, it's how that kind of system has evolved. We can ignore it. We can fight against it. we can use it. Those are options that are available to us. And it's worth acknowledging that a benchmark does already exist. The counselling psychologists have done 6 years of training and they are going in. Admittedly, there's not that many of them. There's only 1,000 based on the previous slides, but they are getting those jobs. When they go up against a counsellor as a team lead or as a department head, they've got a good argument. And I would like to see the professions better able to respond to that. And then the next one, there are gaps in counselling training. There are gaps in every part of training, but there are gaps because of efficiency. There are gaps because we're trying to get things done quickly. There are gaps because of modality preferences. There are gaps because of priorities. And that's just, you know, a part of the world. So, yeah. So there's some challenges. As I said, I'm bad cop. Luckily you all get to have lunch after this, and you know, hopefully someone will still talk to me. But there's also a lot of opportunity. When we break down things and identify them, then we can tackle them. When we're not talking about them, it can seem like it's insurmountable, but it's not. Okay. So now with this, what we're providing is some information based on what's come to the office and the organisation over the, you know, sort of like a bit of a brain dump over the last 2.5 years. This does not represent our plans for our accreditation function, which are with, as Nigel called it, the incredible need. You know, this is more feedback from what I'm hearing from employers and from the community. The accreditation function itself will be informed by a committee of experts, hopefully some of you included in that, and that will involve, you know, that will be a formal process of engagement with training providers. So to use this is on that first line there, key conversation. This is a key conversation. Nigel and I have been talking for weeks about what we wanted to talk to you about and how this was going to work and what was important to raise. It's not a lecture. I know you're all looking at me, but I am really hoping that we'll get the opportunity to discuss these ideas. You can say, no, I don't agree with you. That's not my experience. That's not what I see. But by having those conversations, we can all come together and you know, reach a plan and approach and move forward. Okay. So that's fun. That's our leadership purpose, really. Our second one is about accreditation, working with the training providers, and then the third one is registration. I'll also just go back to Nathan's point. There's a lot of conversation about training standards. You know, but the national standards the government are interested are actually registration standards. So there's quite a key difference there around how we look at our practice and our purpose. Okay, this is one of my particular bugbears. We get these emails, multiple of these emails every single week, and every time I get them, I just want to cry. My staff find it absolutely heartbreaking.
Can you read that?
I'll read it out. Okay, hi, I'm interested in having the ability to have a Medicare provider number. Could you please advise how I go about obtaining this? More and more clients are contacting me and they require this, they're unable to pay. I am a clinical member of PACFA and I have a master's degree in counselling. Appreciate your time. Okay. This is a lovely person. I mean, I've deliberately obscured them. This is a wonderful person who has wonderful training and engagement. But let's look at the obvious there. They've got through a master's. They've had more than 750 hours. So they've had at least 3 years of engagement out in the bigger world. They've obviously opened a private practice. They've worked in their private practice, presumably for a number of years. And they know so little about the Australian healthcare system that they're writing to us asking for a Medicare number. And, you know, that conversation is not going to go anywhere good. There is nothing we can say as a registration body that they're going to be happy with. And, you know, so my membership staff are stressed. They came into this job because they wanted to help people and provide systems and offer good advice. There's nothing they can do in that situation. You know, and we get this kind of query pretty much. So, you know, so in terms of that, in terms of the question of the topic, is counselling training fit for purpose? And I know Nathan touched on, there was a whole lot of different things that he would put in there and different conversations that you all might want to have. And I leave that entirely up to you, but can someone please teach them? Just please, make sure that they understand that, because it doesn't help. You know, it just makes a difficult couple of years for them even more difficult. Okay, so we touched on this. No more, no data, no consistent across the room data about counselling graduates. So this is based on Google. This is me Googling, trying to work out information, trying to see where we're at. 135 training courses with AQ of 7 or above. 75% of you to be postgraduate. So please nod or shake your head if you think this is on track or not. Only 25% undergraduate. If we go, so the vast majority of 2 years, yeah, that's all fine. So if we go back to that previous point, 75% of the graduates won't get a job with that counselling call centre that I mentioned. I'm just really hoping you're all going to go, no, it's much better, it's all fine, we've solved that problem. Okay, so these are our tips, these are our thoughts and consideration. You know, they're probably the same thoughts that you've all had, but maybe having them in this room in a broader conversation will be useful. Maybe being able to go back to your department head or your chancellor and saying, well, PACFA also did this. Maybe that will help. You know, maybe there'll be some consideration about what's possible in this space. More 3-year courses. You know, I'm thinking to get round to every single employer and change their mind with my great persuasive narrative. Fingers crossed. The government is invested in the idea of multidisciplinary teams. So we need people to come out who can at least speak the language to start that engagement in that space. That doesn't mean that every counsellor needs to do it, but we do need enough counsellors who can do it. Because that is where the future leaders of the profession, employers and teams, is going to come. We need to have a consistent baseline in the scope of practice of what people can do. You know, because they need to be safe. We need to be able to say that everyone who is a registered counsellor can support someone with suicidal ideation, because that's what the government wants to know. The government wants to know if I finally manage to get my teenage son to seek help by going to talk to a local counsellor, which is potentially a much easier sell than getting them to a psychologist or taking them anywhere near an emergency department. Will that person actually be able to do the right thing? And sometimes, I mean, I'm confident in PACFA membership, but I'm not always hearing that we're confident everywhere. So that is a key part of what we need to address. Core areas of practice. These are the, you know, I was really interesting with the screen that we're showing about the book. The most searched topic in that book that Nathan had done on open source was domestic violence. It's also where a lot of the work is, because it's where a lot of the funding is. Let's make life easy for people and set them up with those jobs. Something that I find that I think is really tricky, that I think you in this room are in a position to solve, is what our rationale is around graduate diplomas versus diplomas, and what value we place on the previous training that people receive. Because I don't get a consistent answer across the sector. Do we care that people that, you know, have had 10 years of teaching experience and teaching qualification, and that we think that means they have an enhanced ability to establish a therapeutic relationship, and therefore it's perfectly justified they can go into a graduate diploma and qualify in 2 years? That's fine. I can argue, I can work with that. I can advocate about that to government. If that, you know, but if everyone can go into a graduate diploma, if you can go into a graduate diploma with a business qualification or an engineering qualification or a mathematics qualification, what does that mean? Is it actually about, you know, are we genuinely saying that counselling can be learned in this period of time, and that it does that all that matters is that they can attend a classroom and know how to submit assignments? Or do we actually give some value to that previous training? In PACFA, just to give you some context, 30% of our members have previous health-related qualifications, so that's undergraduate psychology, undergraduate social work, nursing. and 20% in teaching. This is actually a huge strength. When I go to government and I talk about why they should be using more counsellors, the key things I focus on are that the counselling is most commonly a second career, that people come in with vast amounts of relevant qualifications and relevant experience. And the other thing I talk about is the fact that the average age is much, much higher. Because when it comes down to it, nobody wants to be in counselling with a 25-year-old. Like nobody, unless they are 25 themselves. So when we're advocating for the sector, that actually makes a lot of sense, but I'm not convinced that it's actually reflected in the training. So I'm curious about how you feel as a sector about that kind of thing. How much value should we put on this? How much value shouldn't we? Student placements, particularly if we're going to have more online involvement, those placements are really important. We get questions, I know the placements are really hard to organise, but other professions tend to do it. We need to make sure those placements are honoured. It is a huge weakness for the profession that new graduates go into private practice. We know they go into private practice because they can't get jobs, hence my boring obsession with jobs. But it is not a good look for the profession when people come out and go into private practice. It's also not a good look for the profession when the profession doesn't say anything about it. This is about leadership. We also, we have problems at the bottom, we have problems at the top. We have amazing practitioners who want to go on and do advanced level masters so that they can get that higher department level job that we were talking about. They can't find a master's program that actually suits them. They apply for programs and discover that they supervise the teacher. And this kind of goes back a little bit to my comment about the Gestalt therapy courses. The language that we use when we use terminology that other people don't understand just adds further confusion. So, PACFA obviously is quite protective of the psychotherapy language. And I appreciate there's work that has needed to be done around what that meant and what the meaning of it is and how it fits into things. And we are doing that, and we will continue to do that. And as Dennis mentioned earlier, there is conversations about whether these are different areas or whether they are a spectrum or a continuum. And those are things that it's up to you as a sector to work out. We can't expect the government to take things seriously or to fund things if we don't have agreement on what those things are. Even to the point that if we are going to disagree, let's disagree inside a room rather than disagreeing out where everyone can see us. So this is all, this is really just to let you know that we are, we're presenting a lot of kind of ideas and conversations and challenges and opportunities for you. We're also doing it internally. We have reviewed our registration. We have reviewed our ethics. We are looking at our own procedures and opportunities. We have multiple members of the board here. Kathy, Nigel, there's lots of things going on. And one of them has been to review our accreditation function. And we are going to be, that's on effectively those applications, well, that will happen in the next 12 months, and we've employed Nita to help us with that. And she is bringing an eagle eye to everything that's going on, which is really exciting. So it's not just the pausing of accreditation, it will be the complete redevelopment of a new committee and a new structure to oversee that. It will not be training standards, it will be accreditation standards. Because training is what happens in a training setting. Accreditation is the standard by which that training is measured. Registration is the measurement of the skills and competencies on an individual level. Okay, so they're actually, originally I presented them as a triangle. Okay. And there is a few bits and pieces that we also need to make sure are there, such as the complaints and appeals process. Okay, so just rounding up. There are lots of opportunities. I've just hit you with a whole lot of really bad news. I'm not going to invite us to any parties at this rate. But the good news is the government, for the first time, has invested $300,000 in the national standards. And just to make it, just to be very clear about that, they're not training standards. They are minimum standards for registration. That is what the government wants. And part of the reason why they're doing that is because when we spoke in the last year, I said, we can't do it. There's too many organisations saying too many different things. We're not going to get agreement. We need the government to come in and say, this is the safe level that we want people to have before they can work in our funded services and without funding. So it's not going to be PACFA standard, which is I would love it to be. We will ask for what we want. We will advocate and say this is what we think it should be, but it will ultimately be up to the government. And they are talking to the State Department of Education. They are talking to Justice. They are talking to the PHNs. They are talking to all the employers. They're going to talk significantly to the NDIA. So this is a real opportunity for us to hear what people actually want from the profession and then respond to it. And it will be transformational one way or another. It doesn't mean everyone has to do the same thing, but at least we'll know what they want. And people will be able to choose to respond to it. The community demand and interest in therapy is ever expanding. You know, we went to the Associations Forum conference earlier this year, which is all different types of membership organisations, and everyone there was all boo-hoo-hoo about how hard it was to get people into their profession. Nigel and I were like, oh, you don't have to go to school, so I encourage people to study counselling. Yeah, this is not a problem we have. Your work is important. People want to study it. They want to be with other people in the therapeutic space. There is growth and opportunity like we don't see in other areas. It's really hard to convince people to become accountants. You know, our sector is so in demand that people study for years and then they come out, and then even though the salaries aren't great, even though the working conditions can be really difficult, they still stick with it. And then they register with their bodies, and then they volunteer with us. Like, that's why I'm here. I'm staff. I get paid for turning up. You know, the amazing commitment of health practitioners, allied health practitioners, volunteer, counsellors, psychotherapists just never ceases to amaze me. And I'm passionate about making sure that you all get the recognition and support that you deserve. So I don't think we should ever underestimate the interest and commitment to your work. And as I often say to government, well, people don't become a counsellor for power or prestige. You know, they do it for all the right reasons. Not every profession has that. And the government values that. That's why they're talking to us about it. The government's doing a whole lot of things. The wave of reform is broad, and the allied health sector is in itself growing and taking up more space. So there are opportunities there to be a part of that, to move forward in this area. Okay, challenges. You need allies. You need other organisations and other professions who say, actually, we want to work with them. When I worked with the hospital pharmacists who had a similar type of challenge, I got my board to all go and speak to, they all work in hospitals, they all went and spoke to doctors they worked with. And then we had a great big conference, and all the doctors came and said how great they were. And then I dragged them on government, and government went, yeah, you are great. The doctors said so. That was using the system that works. Those allies are really, really helpful. They don't have to be doctors. They could be justice workers. They could be social workers. They could be people in all the different departments. But what Nigel was saying earlier about the need to engage those people around you is really important. Competition drives innovation. If without competition, it's very, very easy just to sit wherever you are and not change. It's easy for a private practice not to decide they have to review their fees. It's easy for an organisation not to decide that they can't be bothered investing in a particular member service. Competition, is part of what makes us all better. And so, in lots of different places and not in a nasty, derogatory way, I think we should all just get a little bit more comfortable with the fact that, we're going to compete. Because at the end of the day, people in private practice have to cope with competing with each other all the time. So why should the rest of us try and avoid understanding that? Advanced training is really useful because it gives you the opportunity to highlight your high achievers. It's very hard for a high achiever to talk about how wonderful the sector is when everyone is at the same level all the time, because no one wants to talk about how anyone else has done any additional training, doesn't want to recognise it. And realistically, it's the same in the tail too. If we're not prepared to say that this practice is better than that practice or this training is really valuable, then effectively you're saying everyone's at the same level. And that will always be the lowest level, because when it comes down to it, the community want to pay as little as possible for therapy, and the government wants to pay as little as possible. So if we are not going to differentiate on a based, it could be like, we would do it on AQF, but you could do it in numerous different ways. Then what you're effectively doing is putting everyone at the same minimum base. So the future of counselling. You guys are the leaders of the profession. You're the trainers. You set the standard, you hold the conversation, you hold the registration bodies to account, you keep us all honest. And you inspire the graduates. So in many ways, the future of counselling is up to you. Don't mean to put it all on your shoulders, but as a kind of broader kind of concept, the sector is definitely at a turning point. And so there's a conversation worth having about where you want it to go. At PACFA, we're very committed to the idea of counselling and psychotherapy as an allied health profession, because that's where we see the opportunity is. And to be honest, I don't know where the opportunity is not in allied health. But that is still a conversation for you. That is up to you, and that is, how you understand things. And then the final kind of comment there is, after this, when you go back and digest and consider and really want to argue with your Hunter about that and totally disagree with her about this, which is perfectly fine. What supports do you need from us? How can PACFA support you in advocating for your courses, for resources, for the staff, the students, for positioning? Because at the end of the day, that's what we are here for as well. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Really want to acknowledge the time and that certainly for me, I wasn't prepared for the format, the lovely sort of interactional format that you had here. When I was imagining this, it was different to what I'm in today. So better prepared for next time. So I just wanted to acknowledge you and acknowledge that there was a lot to listen through and quite tiring. I probably also could have prepared you better for that, because we knew that would be long and difficult to sit all the way through to the end of. And I did mean to encourage you to take notes along the way of the questions you wanted to ask, so that we could have those questions